Welcome to Teaching Artist Podcast, a show dedicated to discussions of teaching art to kids, making art, and how those things overlap and feed each other. I'm Rebecca Potts, your host, a visual arts teaching artist. I loved hearing Karina Esperanza Yánez share her story. She offers such insight to the challenges facing our Black and Brown students, as well as ways to begin addressing those challenges as a teacher. Karina Esperanza Yánez is an artist and arts educator from South Central Los Angeles. As an experienced art educator with a demonstrated history of working in arts education and arts management, her goal is to provide students with the necessary tools to not only become creative in their own right as young artists, but positively engage with their community. Karina is committed to cultivating welcoming and inclusive art experiences for the youth of South LA. Her art ranges from photography, printmaking, sewing, drawing, and everything else in between. Fascinated by history, sociology, politics, and literature, Karina incorporates all of these interests in her work as much as possible. She is currently pursuing a master's degree in art administration from Claremont Graduate University. She holds a graduate degree in community arts education from the Rhode Island School of Design and a bachelor's degree in fine arts from the California Institute of the Arts. Karina founded the organization Greetings from South LA, an arts-focused community resource for the youth, educators, and families of South Los Angeles. They do wonderful work in South LA, but they've also created online resources, including ideas for parents, tutorials for students, and some amazing educator resources. Check the link in the show notes or go to greetingsfromsouthla.org and look for the art toolkits. There's also a link to many resources there labeled Teaching Resistance. So go check those resources. This episode is edited by Jolene Smith. I am so thrilled to be working with Jolene and would love to bring her on for all of the episodes so that I can focus more on the content and on rolling out some other helpful community programming and resources. I am so grateful for your support, allowing me to hire Jolene. If you would like to help keep this show going and build up this community, head over to teachingartistpodcast.com/support to see the many ways that you can support this work. Now, let's get into the conversation. Hi, so I am here with Karina Esperanza Yánez, and I'm very excited to hear about all of the things that you have going on. I like to kind of start with some background. So could you kind of walk us through your story and specifically how you became an artist and an educator and kind of which one came first?
Yeah. Hi. Yeah. Art always sort of like came very natural for me. I think it was like mostly about like the curiosity of like how things worked. And like I have like chunks of vivid memory of like trying to explore like different materials and like try to teach myself how to use things as a child. And when I was in like middle school and high school, like middle school, I wasn't doing very well academically, but whenever there was some sort of like a project where art was sort of embedded, that was sort of like where I shined, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of trickled on into high school as well. And again, once I got into high school, like it was like doing okay, but by the time that I think that I got to like the 10th grade, like my parents, particularly my mom, got a little bit concerned that like I wouldn't be able to succeed as much as like she wanted me to by the time I got to like my 11th or senior year of high school, right? I don't know. It was a strange time. Also, when you're a teenager, it's just a strange time in general. But yeah, it was always the same thing. It was like, you know, the teachers were like, oh, you know, she has the potential or whatever. But it was always during these like moments where I had like there was some sort of like art component. I remember in my history class we had to do like it was like some sort of like replica of a newspaper from like way back in the day. And I was like so invested in that. I like dyed coffee. Like I used coffee as like my paint, and I was just so like interested in exploring materials. I don't remember anything about the assignment, but I just remember those experiences where I was like so excited to just create something. Yeah. So then by the school that I went to is in LA, and they have a whole emphasis on like being college ready and stuff. And now it's been like 10, 15 years later, they have like developed this whole like system of schools. But back in the day, I think it was like only 1 or 2 schools that existed within the like their network of schools. And the graduating class before us, they had like pushed students to like apply to private schools and like Cal States and UCs and stuff like that. But so they seem to have like tried to do that early on with us, like when we were juniors in high school. And all this to say that was like I just remember that being like a very pivotal time for me, because we were sort of like forced to look at schools, and we wanted to like hand the counselor sort of like a list of schools we wanted to apply to, you know? But all the local Cal States and UCs, like they seemed kind of boring to me. Yeah, like they had interesting programs, but I was always like really drawn. I was like always looking at the art department and like work that I was seeing just like based on the website. It seemed interesting, but I was like, I don't know, it didn't make sense for me. So I remember going on like the College Board website, and I like typed in art school, and then like my life changed. So then I was like, there's art schools? Like, what is this?
Yes.
But I was like so old already, I feel. It was just so like, life changing to me. So I like had my little list of schools that I applied to. And then by the time I was a senior, I applied to like a bunch of schools, and like my portfolio was really awful, but I ended up getting into, I think it was like 12 of the 13 schools that I applied to. And
nice.
Yeah, I was really excited too, because it was like really hard, because I took art in my junior year of high school, which was like that's like a whole nother conversation about like art education and stuff. But it was, that, I don't know, that like those moments that was like a long way to answer your question.
No, it's great to hear that, because I also see so much of like our students in that story. And just the way, like, there was one little thing I even wrote down where you said something like, I just remember that I was so excited about the materials. And you're like, I can't remember what the assignment was, but the level of excitement around making is what sticks in your head. And that's, like what we hope for our students, and where we have to recognize like these are the experiences where we can reach them.
For sure. Yeah.
So it's great to hear that kind of background as well. So then you ended up going to CalArts, right?
I did, yeah.
And what was that experience like? How was that?
Every year was very different.
Yeah.
my first year there, I dormed, and it was also this is also me, because I'm very like introverted, and I have like social anxiety and things like that. So it was difficult in some ways in terms of like navigating like the social circles. So my first year, I don't think I really dormed successfully because I was always trying to come back to LA. Then later I realized it was like I was in a very completely different, I was like in a new environment. Like all of my peers were basically white, and I wasn't used to that. And my relationship with white folks up until then was like most of them were my teachers, and
which is a whole other issue.
Yeah. But in that moment, I didn't have like the language for it, or I hadn't like processed it. So it was very difficult. And in my second year, I believe for like the first semester, I ended up finding a friend whom I had met before I started CalArts. I attended their like CAPSA program. There's the summer arts program, which is held down in LA, and I met someone there, and she's also like to this day, she's like a phenomenal friend, and we sort of like bonded. But I ended up staying with her that semester, like her family that semester, who they had a home up in Valencia, and I was able to sort of like commute back and forth. But by the second semester of my second year, I was like, I have to be in LA. I have to live down here. Like I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
I guess that's another long way to say that for like a lot of reasons, it was like very difficult for me to navigate those spaces, because I needed to be home, and like I needed to be around people who look like me. And
Yeah.
there were, not to say that there weren't people like that at CalArts, but I also then started like noticing that even so, folks who maybe just visually look like you, they grow up very differently, right? Especially if they
Mm-hmm.
grew up in like a, like in the suburbs or like higher socioeconomic status. Even though like maybe there were like other Latinas in my classes and things like that, we didn't necessarily grow up the same. So like our
Right.
mindsets were like very different. So I ended up wanting to like leave, and I was like trying to like figure out how to do that without like dropping out of school.
Right.
Yeah, it was a fun time. I ended up for my third year. I did my first semester there, and then my second semester, I think. Yeah, it was the second semester. I ended up doing a transfer to not a transfer, like a exchange program with Sarah
Mhm.
Lawrence.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and then that was
Yeah.
like different in the same like in the same ways, but it was
Mhm.
like that semester there really helped me try to figure out a lot of things that I was like that I didn't have the language for, if that makes sense. So once I returned
Yeah.
back to CalArts, so like for my fourth year, I feel like I sort of excelled even more because I had took that semester to sort of like think.
Was that really hard to be so far away from home then at Sarah Lawrence?
Yeah, it was hard, but I think it was like necessary in a weird way. I think because I kept sort of like coming back to LA and like being like, I'll just commute, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. I wasn't getting out of my comfort zone a little bit.
Hmm.
So I think it was like for me, I feel like it was like a necessary push.
Yeah.
So yeah, so then once I like graduated, I feel like I took like a year or two to sort of like process everything that I had, like all of sort of like the microaggressions and experiences that I like went through and that my peers went through, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, I loved it, and I like wouldn't replace it for anything because I also met like a really good group of people there as well.
Right.
But like, it was sort of like messed up that we all sort of bonded over the same things, you know?
Yeah.
But
I feel like that's probably part of almost every liberal arts college.
for sure, yeah. Even now, I think it's the same. I
Mhm.
don't know. It's like really funny because I'm doing grad school again, and it's similar in some ways. We're like sort of like drawn to the people who have similar experiences as you, or like
Mhm.
maybe grew up similar as you did.
Yeah, and it's just like an added layer to that struggle. I feel like most freshmen in college have a hard time. Like it's hard to kind of shift, go away from home, even if it's not super far and you're, more responsible. You're like sort of a little mini adult. And
Yeah,
I totally relate to that struggle of feeling like you're not in the same like socioeconomic situation as most of your peers, but to have the added layer of just not having anybody who looks like you or having the few that do just you can't relate to on other levels is it just makes like adds so many layers to that struggle of being away from home your first year of college.
yeah, it was very interesting. I mean, I also am like very thankful because I think a lot of those experiences like shape a lot of the things that I'm doing now, you know?
Mhm. Yeah.
But yeah, it was wild.
So then you went on to get a degree in community arts education. So again, far from home. Was that kind of right after you finished, or did you said you took a little time to kind of process?
No, it was right after, but I
Okay.
think my process was like a 2 year thing. Yeah, it was right after for multiple reasons. I think I felt because like how I explained earlier about my like first 2 years at CalArts were like I felt a little lost.
Yeah.
I felt like I needed something. Maybe I don't know. At the time, I think it was like maybe sort of like a cushion. Like I needed another year to figure things out a little bit. And the
Mhm.
word made the most sense was like I need to go back to school.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I ended up applying to a couple schools for when I was in my last year at CalArts. So I applied to a couple like MFA programs, and I applied to the one at RISD.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I got into the MFA programs, and I was really excited. But when I like went to check out the schools and talk to the students and like admissions people, like it didn't make sense for me to do
Mm.
that.
Yeah. What was it that kind of turned you off from that or made it feel like this doesn't work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wanted to be more involved with my community somehow. I think also what made CalArts really successful for me was that I was able to teach the whole time.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so I think it was like a couple weeks in, Darcy Hubler asked to meet with me, and I was like 18. Sure. So we met for like coffee for like maybe 20 minutes, and she sat me down. She was like, I want you to join this team that I'm sort of forming. You'll be paired with like another student who will be teaching with me, and she was sort of like the lead facilitator, the lead teacher for it. And I was like, sure. I was like unsure as to like what she saw. But I was like, I'll give it a try. We went once a week to a school in East LA, and a lot of it was like me just like observing what she was doing and what like other folks that she was bringing into. Something that I thought she did like really well too was that she brought a lot of people into the classroom. So she invited a lot of folks in to come do like just small workshops to students. And I really liked those environments. Yeah, like that was really cool. So I sort of like ended up doing that for 4 years. So by the time I got to my last year at CalArts, I was like, I want that. I want like a good fit.
Yeah. And was that program, did that include teaching, or was it like, what was it, like a certification program or an arts
Yeah,
ed program?
it's an arts ed program. I don't know what it looks like now, but at the time it was like 2 tracks. One of them is like a more traditional, like I think you get like a credential out of it.
Mhm.
And the one that I did was like more emphasis on like community based work. So they paired you
Okay.
up with a local high school, and you go once a week, I think, or we went a couple times a week. I can't remember, but, and then you're sort of like the lead in that class, in an after school class.
Oh, cool. And so that experience in like at CalArts and then again at RISD, was that the first time you'd really thought about teaching or gotten interested in teaching?
That's a good question. I don't know if at the time I felt I was like teaching.
Yeah, I love it. You kind of like sidestepped into it.
Yeah. I liked hanging out with the students, and I liked how excited they would get when we would like explore materials or explore different things. And I feel like, I guess a lot of it was like I really enjoyed sharing what I knew with them.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I'm like hesitant to say that I was like teaching. I don't know. I felt like I was just like, these are all the things that I know.
Right. But isn't that kind of what teachers do? Yeah, amazing. And then you ended up teaching in schools as well. How did that kind of start and what, I guess, what was your experience?
When I returned from SD, that was an interesting experience in itself. I didn't have good experiences there. So when I returned, I was like very upset about a number of things. And I felt that maybe I needed to get out of teaching. So I started applying to, I felt like maybe in an administrative role, I could make a difference.
Mhm.
So I started applying to things, but I was like completely underqualified for it. But I kept getting like interviews and things like that. So I feel like I spent like that summer, most of the summer, like interviewing, and I didn't get any of the positions that I applied for. And then
Oh,
the one teaching job that I was like, okay, I guess I'll apply to this, I ended up getting. And funny how that works out, right? So I taught there for a year, and I really, again, it was like, I don't know, it was like, it was frustrating for like the same reasons that a lot of things are frustrating when you like teach art, especially like if you're coming in and as a teaching artist to school with like all the
yeah.
limitations and things like that. But I really enjoyed it, like nonetheless. And then I got contacted by a school in the San Diego area. That one paid way more than what I was like earning here. So I took it mostly because of that.
Yeah.
And it was a private school, so it was like a completely different shift from the
Mhm.
population that I was working with here in South LA. So I did that for a year, and again, it was like awful for like a number of reasons.
Can I like pause and have you go into some of those reasons and kind of how working with that other population was more challenging or like what different challenges?
My first year, like coming back from grad school, was I did like art in a cart, right? So I like went from
Yeah.
class to class. And it was like, I was told, this is like a whole other thing too. I was told that the supply budget would be like one number, and it ended up being like half of that.
And the first number was probably not enough anyway.
No, it was completely not enough. So it, like, a lot of it was like out of my pocket, right? As I'm sure you know, I'm sure hundreds of people know.
Just like nodding along.
Yeah, so it was like out of pocket. I'm like in this cart. My car is not my classroom. And then suddenly I found myself in like the most beautiful classroom and with like supplies for days. But I know they have another director now, which is like great. Like I met someone there who was like a really good friend now, and they were teaching at the time, but now they're the director of the program. So like I'm really excited about what they're doing. But
Cool.
yeah, but at the time the curriculum was like one of the biggest problems for me because I had to like follow this like curriculum that was from the 1980s, and it was like awful, and it was like I had to follow it. The person sort of like at the time like leading this program, they had this curriculum that they developed that I'm sure worked really well in the like the 80s and the 90s. They ended up having like such a bad turnover of like teaching artists coming in and out. I mean, for a number of reasons, but like the curriculum was like one of them. It just like sucked. It was like very, this is how you draw this. This is what you do, you know? And then it didn't allow for kids to like really explore.
Right.
It wasn't like all completely bad because I also learned a lot about like how to sort of navigate people, and like I also taught like a middle school class. I was teaching K through, I think they go up to the 4th grade for elementary there. So it was K through 4th, and then I taught like a 7th and 8th grade class. But for that one, I had like complete freedom, which was like really exciting. So for there, I just like, I really got to play with like how I designed the curriculum, and I feel like the work that was coming out of from that class was like really exciting because students would sort of just come in, you know, we would check in and they would just sort of like do their own thing. And, you know, they were doing like these photo books, and because they had the resources to do so, you know, like they got books printed from like Blurb that we used there, you know, they were documenting these like things with photography and using writing. And yeah, it was like really exciting to see them like be really excited about their work.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's amazing at a place with so many resources, what's possible if you're kind of like given that freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's also why I mean, I only stayed there for a year. Like I wanted to see that at the elementary level because I felt like at the middle school level, it was not to say that it was like too late, but it made sense for me for the little ones to sort of like be able to have this freedom to explore things and to be given the opportunity to like talk about these like larger concepts. And so by the time they get to middle school and in high school, they're like already, you know, they have the language and they're more prepared.
Absolutely. And so you then started Greetings from South LA, or you had maybe more teaching in there before you dove into that. And I feel like you're like, just from looking at the website and Instagram and that stuff, that you are kind of diving into bigger concepts and bigger ideas with the younger kids through your organization.
Yeah, so when I from San Diego back to LA for like the 10th time, it feels like, I taught at a school in the South LA area, and I stayed there for, I think it was 3 years. And yeah, I was very happy there, and also very miserable for other things, but I felt like I was really excelling in terms of like I had complete freedom in terms of like what I can do in the classroom. You know, there's always those restrictions of like supplies and budgets, and you know, kids like students being pulled out of the class for testing and all these other things, which is like a whole nother conversation. But
yeah, so frustrating.
Yeah. But I think by the time that I got to like my second year teaching there, I was sort of like, I don't know if I was like tired of teaching. So I don't know if that's like the right thing to say, but I wanted to do more. So I started doing like just on the side, I started doing these like field trips during the summer because I started thinking a lot about like the gaps in between. And I wanted to like extend, I guess I was trying to see like how far I could push learning and extend it from like what was going on in the classroom. Because I don't know, I think with like images and things like that, you can only do so much if you like just project it or like show students. but like actually seeing it in person is like a completely different experience, right?
Yeah. It totally changes the way the work feels.
Yeah, yeah. And I was also thinking a lot about like the way, I don't know, I was thinking a lot about access and
Mhm.
the way that, like, I'm gonna be completely honest, like, I grew up in LA, but I don't think I went to LACMA until maybe I was like a junior or senior in high school. I
Right.
don't, I don't even think I knew what LACMA was. I knew about like the stuff at Expo Park because I grew up like a couple blocks away, but I I didn't know anything about LACMA. I don't think I found out about MoCA until like a portfolio event that was held there, where like my art teacher was like, "You need to go to this thing," and then a lot of the things that exist now, they didn't then.
Right.
So I was like thinking about like, okay, like the students need to like, one, be aware, students and their parents need to be, one, like aware that these places exist, but like also I think it's more nuanced than just a being like, hey, come over here, you know? Like we need to figure out ways where folks can feel like welcomed and invited, and these spaces that they're belong to them, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed that one of the things you've done on those visits that you shared on Instagram was creating your own handouts and making sure that you're like comparing some of the work in the museum to work by contemporary Black artists or Latinx artists or, other artists of color that you're giving away if the kids don't see themselves represented in the actual museum, that you're like, well, I'm bringing that in.
Yeah, I get really excited about those, and students, they're like, wait, but they do it anyways, you know? But after they're like, no, I want to keep my card. So, you know, they're funny. But yeah, that was also because I don't know, I think it's one thing to invite students in, and it's particularly students, like Black students and students of color,
Yeah.
to invite them in. But
But like you said, making them feel welcome and
yeah,
that access means more than just, hey, it's over here. You can go if you want.
for
Yeah.
sure. And also like a lot of it is like, you know, I really like the Dada movement, right?
Mhm.
But I'm like, if I have to read it on a plaque and I'm bored, I know they're gonna be bored. That's also like one of my rule of thumbs. Like if I'm bored reading this, or if I'm bored watching this, but I like this stuff, like maybe it's not being delivered well, or delivered in a way where it's like engaging for folks.
Mhm.
So like, you know, what's another alternative to that?
Yeah. I
I
love
want it to
that.
be like a modern Sister Wendy.
Oh, and you're doing it. You've also been starting to put out, like talking about sort of decolonizing your art syllabus, which is a big topic, but I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I guess it was because of, I'm like hesitant to say like everything that's going on because it's very complicated.
Right.
But
And it's
I
been going
was,
on. It's like,
and it's been going on, yeah.
oh,
In my teaching practice, at least, I stopped teaching I stopped teaching white artists completely
mhm.
a few years ago now. But the way that I sort of did it with my students was I talked about Marcel Duchamp, and like in the classroom, I also just get really animated, depending on the grade level, but I get really animated. But I went into I had read an article the night before about how he, like, essentially, I guess he stole the idea from someone who was, I forget her name, which is awful. I guess essentially the story goes that he, to my understanding, maybe they were friends or they were dating, but he stole the fountain idea, like the ready-made idea from her. And I was like so upset. So the next day in the morning, I like completely threw out my lesson, and I was like telling the students this like story about this guy who like had this amazing idea that I was really, you know, that I like, this is one of my favorite artworks and one of my favorite movements. And then at the end, I like preface it with, and he stole the idea. Hi. And then I was like, so, you know, as a result, I'm no longer in, like, I also just like to be like really transparent with them. Like, I'm no longer going to talk about these guys. So like I did like a brief for like these are all these other guys that this is Matisse, who I love, who I like, I respect their work, but I'm no longer going to teach them because unfortunately you're going to be sick and tired of them by the time you get to high school.
Right. Yeah.
I made it sort of like a point to have like a list of folks who were particularly just Black or brown artists from like just from everywhere, from like Asia, from, you know, sort of like on a global scale. And I don't think my list is like very comprehensive still, but I definitely thought it was like a start.
Yeah.
So I made it a point, like if I had to, go by these standards and go by these, like, this is like the elements of art and things like that, I was like, okay, how can I like rethink about this in a way where it makes sense for my students and for myself?
Absolutely.
Sorry, to answer your question though. I was thinking a lot about this when I was I was seeing all these posts about anti-racist like teaching and things like that, but I wasn't seeing enough about like how to actually do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's hard.
Yeah. And I feel like it's even trickier for white educators, and especially those who, maybe grew up somewhere where there don't even know that many Black or brown people, and they're like surrounded in this little white bubble and have grown up in a white system that has only taught them about white artists. So then, you really have to go outside yourself to find, how can I shift that perspective and artists that I can teach.
And I'm really excited. Like I received it was like hundreds of messages, and I will not respond to everybody.
Right. It's just too much.
But what I was reading from folks was like people, in the Midwest or like in sort of like in a very rural part of the country or even like on a global scale too, that they wanted to do these things. But then I guess I got like a little bit scared because I think it's more complicated than just being like, this is Kehinde Wiley and this is, he's a Black man, he's an artist and blah, blah, blah. It has to sort of make sense as well to what you're doing. And I didn't want it to be also like some sort of like cookie cutter thing.
Like you're checking the boxes.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of like what also some people perceived it as, which is, I don't know, it's like not the case. Yeah. I don't think that's the answer either.
Well, I loved you had like a follow-up that was like, this has to also be internal work. Like you have to be doing the work yourself and then bringing that into the classroom. It's
funny too because also it was like a less popular post, but because it's harder, and it's also something I'm like still working on, right? And I don't think I'm like gonna have all the answers, or like not one person has all the answers, but yeah, I don't know. I think it's for sure like internal, and it has to. I think that's where you kind of have to start, if anything.
Yeah.
And see like why. It's like a lot of self-reflection. It's like, why are you teaching art? And if you're going to talk about these white artists, okay, fine, but like, where can you include other people, right? And then how you do that is like different too, which is, I think, something that is not being, at least I haven't seen it being talked about as much, because the delivery, I think, is like mostly important.
I feel like I mention that whenever I talk about race here, that I've only done for the last couple episodes, but I keep saying that's where I'm kind of trying to focus, because that's where I see myself lacking, that I do show mostly non-white, non-male artists, but sometimes I'm so focused on like the aesthetics that I don't share very much about who they are or like the meaning behind their work, and that is really important. So trying to figure out how, especially as a white educator, like, can I find a video of the artist and like let the students see them from their own perspective and like hear their own voice, so it's not me saying, well, he said da da da.
That's also something really cool that I think we have. Videos really do. I don't want it to be in it like, I was trying to picture like some imaginary classroom in the middle of nowhere where the teacher, like, and they mean well, right? They're an African American artist, or they're this and this, and then they sort of like butcher or like misconstrue their work, or misinterpret things.
Yeah.
So that's also why I was like, okay, we need to sort of like pause right now. Especially too, because we're like in the summer. So folks who are like not teaching right now, but maybe will in a month once, whatever schools look like. And the
issue we're dealing with right now.
Yeah. But whatever that looks like, right? But I think right now it's like a good, at least for educators, to sort of like pause and reflect and reevaluate things.
And even, practicing the pronunciation of the artist that you want to share. and thinking through how, like, learning about their background and their history so that you can share that.
It's hard, but I think if people do the work, I'm like really excited for it because I think
Yeah.
it'll be better in the long run and like more exciting and engaging for students.
Right. And thinking along those lines and all of the artists that you share, are there a couple that you would want, that you feel like are like a couple artists that you feel like are really impactful for your students that you would want to share, like let people know, go look these guys up?
I have a list, but if it's okay, I won't say it.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
But I guess I will say this though. I think that because I've seen a couple lists circulate,
Mhm.
and they typically include the same artists. But what I will say is that it's also important to not use the same artists over and over again,
Yeah.
just because they check this sort of box.
Mm.
In the same way that we have the canon of like white male artists, I would be cautious of like developing another canon of like the great whatever artists,
Mhm.
and then that be the only list that circulates, because there's a lot of really great work coming out from like contemporary artists who are maybe not as well known and who are also doing really great work. So I think like thinking about like more contemporary artists or like illustrators and like animators, that's another realm that like my students are really into anime and like, yeah, like digital illustrations and things like that.
Mhm.
So I've also kind of been making it a point for myself to like look up those kinds of works and artists on like Instagram or just like Googling things
Yeah.
and see what I find, because they're also like doing really beautiful things, right?
Right.
Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but I would just be cautious of sort of like having like a top 5 lists of
Mhm.
artists that you should look at, and then we kind of forget about all these other amazing artists that exist.
Absolutely. Thank you, because I love that answer, actually. It's the kind of also talking about meeting students where they are and like being more than that, like recognizing what they're interested in and instead of imposing your interests on them.
For sure. Yeah, it's really hard because I definitely am like very vocal with them about what I like. But I also try to show them things that maybe I wouldn't be particularly drawn to. And that's something that I'm also like working on
Yeah.
and trying to find those people because they're out there, and they do really great things. It's like a matter of just personal preference, right?
Right. And have you found just like Instagram, but then also just like Googling whatever it is, are those the easiest ways that you found to find new artists, or are there any like other sort of directories or sources that you would go to?
It's just been Instagram. Yeah. Instagram, I don't know. I think Instagram is it's a scary and powerful tool.
Right. Yeah.
But it's great because a lot of people, not everybody does, but a lot of people do have a page or like a page dedicated to them.
Right.
You're like, at least, I don't know. It's like a starting point for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've talked a lot about teaching. I also want to hear more about your own artwork and kind of how you're fitting it in and what you're working on. Yeah, do you think could you maybe describe your work a little bit?
It's always such a hard question.
I know. We're visual people and now we're like, okay, put it to words.
I think after I graduated from school, it was like really hard for me to make work
Mhm.
because I felt like there had to be some sort of like quote unquote right way to do so. And especially like coming from an institution where like conceptual art is like kind of put on a pedestal,
Right.
I couldn't make work for a while. So I've been doing I bought like a watercolor set, and I've been doing a lot of watercoloring for the past, I don't know how many years now.
Yes.
But I don't think anyone will ever see them. Definitely mostly just for me, because I think I had to sort of like unlearn some of the things that I like learned,
Mhm.
where maybe like certain types of art was like put on this pedestal of like what makes good art. Right now I'm doing a lot of watercolors when I have a chance. I was doing like photography a while back, but I felt that I had to sort of like pause that and check in with myself and think about like what I was documenting and how I was doing that. Because I think, yeah, I was thinking a lot about sort of like these like westernized institutions and sort of like what we're taught and like the ways that we're taught to look at things.
When you say that, it makes me think of like the deeper sort of almost like subconscious ways of looking that are like embedded in the white-centered teaching, the white-centered class.
Yeah. So that's something that I like. I don't know. I think I'm still processing parts of it, but I felt like for me, like watercoloring right now was more like intimate.
Mm-hmm.
It could be quick, or it could, you could take days to make something.
Yeah.
So it was like something that I could manage well, and also I can do it like at home, so I don't need like a large space.
Right. And do you see yourself getting back into photography at some point once you've like wrapped your head around it? Or is that something you feel like, no, I'm going to stick with painting?
No, I don't think so, because this is like part of like my innate curiosity for how things work. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think I also like to bounce around from like medium to medium. So like I was really obsessed with welding for a while. I was like really into like, printing and silk screening for a while. So I think that's just something like maybe perhaps like what my personality is like, or what like just sort of like I'm drawn to. I like to know a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
Also because I think it helps me in the classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because it's like, how can you teach all these different materials if you haven't experienced them?
For sure.
Are there any sort of big ideas that are coming out in your work, even if it's work that you don't intend on sharing? Or does it feel like it's like, I feel like sometimes my work is almost just a therapeutic process?
It's for sure therapeutic.
Yeah.
I think another thing that I was like so worried about coming out of school, especially an institution like CalArts, was to have some sort of like impactful meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes it just has to be something that one does because it's what they need in that moment.
Yeah.
And, the same way with like students who, maybe they're not like particularly happy with what they're doing and they want to throw it away or whatever, but maybe they needed that.
Mm-hmm.
They just need that moment, those like the hour or whatever to create, just because they need a process, whatever.
Right. Right. And that the process is more important than the end result.
1000%. Yes.
Yeah. And it seems like you've had some like big creative blocks. And I've experienced that issue of schools really focusing on conceptual work and like how do you continue that, and how do you, especially when you come out of school and you have a lot of other things going on in your life, how do you find the time to think of those things? So would you have any kind of advice for getting past that, or getting like through a creative block?
The biggest thing, like if I could tell my younger self at least, is just do whatever is right for you and like create whatever makes sense to you.
Yeah.
I'm sure like many people have been told things to this like a similar effect. Like I was kind of being told what to create and like how to do it and like what would be popular and what would like either sell or would be popular in a gallery. And I think that yeah, like that's cool and everything, but that's not what made sense to me. So and then that might change too, which is okay.
Right.
So that's also like part of it. I think part of like the process, but and that's like the kind of work that I like, and that's the kind of work that like in a time where we could visit galleries and things like that. Those are the kinds of spaces that I would go to and go look at the work and admire. And I think I'll continue to do so, but it's not something like that right now. I feel is something that needs to come out of me.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe just talking more about the organization, Greetings from South LA, and kind of like the logistics of starting an organization, and kind of how you had this amazing idea but like brought it out of the idea stage. How did you grow that baby and birth that baby?
It's been very, 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 very hard. I'm still learning a lot. I think I have read more books on business and like nonprofit starting that I have ever wanted to. It was easy. It was easier to sort of do it on my own in ways because I can kind of do whatever I wanted. But I also I think I had to start thinking about like, okay, if I want this to be sustainable and like long term, it obviously can't just be whatever Karina wants to do, right? It has to make sense for the community,
Mm-hmm.
and it has to make sense for the students and for whoever we're serving.
Right.
So I've brought on a group of people who thankfully they said yes, and I'm like very grateful that they like the idea so much that they're serving on the board.
Mm-hmm.
We're like in the process to sort of formalize things to file for nonprofit status and
Yes.
stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah. So that's really exciting, but it's challenging in like not the ways that I sort of expected because of the pandemic.
Right.
But prior to that, I was like, like going to different schools and sort of like introducing myself and having like educators and like parents in the community sort of like get to know me, and I felt like that was a good starting off point because I think it's easy for me to like do programming within like my circles
Mm-hmm.
and with like the core group of like student followers that I have, but I wanted to think about how to like expand on that.
Right.
I mean, it's been really fun. It's just I have to be like more thoughtful and conscious about each step.
Did you start with community-based programming? Do you have a space there, or are you working out of like you're working directly with schools? Kind of what are the main program?
Yeah, so we don't have a space. We're gonna launch a larger fundraising campaign later, so I don't want to give out the idea right away.
Okay, yeah.
But we don't have a space. Where I will say this: we're gonna continue the field trips, hopefully whenever that's possible, which doesn't look like it's gonna be anytime soon. But that's okay. And we're going to be working closely with a number of schools in the South Central area,
Awesome.
which is exciting. And we're gonna be a program that I'm like particularly excited about right now is like I've also been thinking about like a college access program, particularly for students who are interested in applying to art schools and guiding them through that process. I'm in communication with a couple local art schools who are like interested in that as well. So I'm just trying to think about like what makes sense for our population. And also I felt like it was like really important not just to have kids apply to art schools, but like think about like the types of art schools, right? Because like Otis looks very different than CalArts, and Art Center looks very different than Otis, right? Those are the things that I think are like not talked about as much.
Yeah. Would that also include would it include any kind of like I'm picturing ongoing support once they're there to kind of help with the same issue you experienced where you kind of got there, showed up, and you were like, oh,
yes, we met last week. I met last week with the school, and I met last week with a local educator, and that was like one of the main things that we talked about because I think that for sure needs to be that should be not just in this program, but I think embedded with like all college ready things. There needs to be like not just financial, but just like emotional support, just someone to have coffee with or like bounce ideas and just vent with.
Yeah. Have you heard of the Posse program?
Yeah, some kids from my high school participated in that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I've also been thinking about making it. Yeah, my critique with these programs, and I like to be very honest. So
no, I love it. Give us your honesty.
My critique with a lot of programs like that, though, is that they definitely exclude a lot of students, and that was something that I also like experienced. Like we had a lot of students who were part of these like college bound programs where they like got to visit these schools and stuff, and it was really great for them, and they ended up attending a lot of these schools, but they for whatever reason they excluded like a huge chunk of the population. So whether it be grades or whatever, but I think that there needs to be like a mind shift in terms of like who is quote unquote qualified to participate in these programs.
My actually freshman college roommate was part of the Posse program. She was from New York, but she like that program wasn't enough for her. And I saw that happen with other students that she ended up leaving. She was like, I can't stay here at this like rural school. I need to go back to the city. How much can those programs do, and what do they need to shift to make it more helpful for students?
Like all the systems need to be reworked.
Break it down and start again.
Yeah, for sure. Because it's I don't know. It's again, it's like how institutions just like say that they're like, or our door is open, come on in. Like it's way more complicated than that.
Right.
It's the same thing with like college institutions.
So many layers of systems to break down.
For sure.
Do you feel like there have been any really good resources that have kind of helped you along the way? Things that you would recommend?
Like teaching resources?
Yeah, teaching resources.
I will preface this with saying that you have to take things with a grain of salt. Because you also have to be critical of like who's writing these curriculums and things like that, and like what their sort of agenda is. But I like teaching tolerance. It's like a cool resource that I have. But I personally have stopped looking at a lot of those resources and just started looking at like maybe educators and like people who are actually in the classroom and who are maybe not necessarily teaching art, but I feel like I've learned so much from them. The book Push Out is really great by Monique Morris. And let's see, For White Folks Who Teach in the Hood, and the rest of y'all too. I think it's Christopher, I forget his last name. The title of the book is For White Folks Who Teach in the Hood. It's a great book. So I've been just reading like those books I've like just like always reading about. One that I'm rereading right now that I read a couple years ago is We Want to Do More Than Survive. A lot of just reading and like seeing what other educators are writing about and what they're thinking about.
Kind of a fun question, and I feel like we've probably touched on this stuff too, but is there anything you're really kind of curious about right now? It could be in your own art making or just like living in the world. What are you curious about?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot what the long-term effects of all these things are going to be. Maybe that's just like a bigger question, but
yeah,
because I think it needs to be sustainable, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, how to make that happen.
Because I think there's a lot of momentum right now and it's really exciting, but we need to figure out how folks can rest and take care of themselves and then keep the momentum sort of like, what's that saying? It's like, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Or I've heard it said, and I've seen like a graphic of we're only in the foothills. We've got a whole mountain to climb. So don't wear yourself out now in the foothills.
Yeah, for sure.
Kind of fun question. What is your go-to order at your favorite restaurant or like your favorite food?
I was talking to my partner about this. I'm on a hunt and I have been on a hunt for the best pad thai in LA.
I don't know if you find it.
This is like a weird thing I have. I want to hit up like all the Thai restaurants. It's just like a personal mission.
I love that we have, like, I'm also in LA, so we have this access to all these restaurants, although now not so much.
Yeah. This is the last thing I'll say, but I like with art too, with like all these art institutions and like how I feel like I found out about them so late in the game. I feel the same thing about food. And like, I didn't eat Indian food until college. So it was like, I have missed out. I feel like I've been trying to catch up.
Yeah. So now you just have to go constantly, like eat all the food. Well, thank you so much, Karina. It was really insightful, just so valuable to hear your story and all of the advice that you have. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, she gave me so much food for thought. As I continue the internal work of becoming anti-racist while diving in and adjusting my curricula and seeking ways of using this platform for anti-racist work, it's so helpful to hear from art educators who have been doing this work much longer and art educators of color. I deeply appreciate the time Karina has taken, not only here on the podcast, but also on her Instagram feed, to help educate and share resources. Go follow her, support her work. I've linked to her organization, Greetings from South LA, as well as her book recommendations in the blog post, so check that out. Thank you so much for listening. As always, you can reach me at Teaching Artist Podcast on Instagram or teachingartistpodcast@gmail.com. Who do you want to hear from? Please share your recommendations of teaching artists. And if you loved this episode, please subscribe, leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow me. It really makes a big difference. Thank you.